All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Robert Smirking Gun Reviews, and I know it's been out for a little bit, and the usual gang of YouTube movie reviewers has already been all over this, but I'm here to talk about Netflix's original movie, Apostle. So if you are watching this, I want to thank you for choosing to watch this, whether you've just seen it or you liked it and you want to see just another opinion on it. And I really appreciate it because I don't know why I put off watching this for so long, because I am a just gigantic Dan Stevens fan. I also like Michael Sheen a lot. And I gotta say, like, this movie is fucking bananas. This has been, I guess, a pretty good year for horror, it seems. Or tense thrillers, or however you want to categorize this movie. Whether it was like Haunting of Hill House, which I loved. You know, a lot of people seem to really like the new Halloween movie. I could care less about that one, but there seems to be like a difference between some of these things. Like, there's still bad horror out there, but this year has been pretty good for scary stuff, as far as like quality and acting and things like that. Things being well received too. And so I want to just throw my little opinion in the ring for this. I guess one of the main reasons why I put off watching it was the length. It's a long movie. For, you know, most horror movies and stuff are probably clocking like most like hour 45 minutes, something like that. Most of them are like more like 90 minutes or less. But this one clocks in at like 2 hours 10 minutes long, I think. But it's all really well worth it. This is not for everyone. Okay, the trailer does not even really, it gives you an idea that you're gonna see some nutty things, but it doesn't go to the extent that of how crazy this is gonna get. So if you can't handle increasingly insane situations and gore and just people being really, really terrible to each other, I do not recommend this movie to you if you have that kind of weak sensibilities. That's not a knock against you. I'm just trying to prepare you. Because there were moments in this movie that really frustrated me. I really like it, but certain stories, especially things that have to do with like religion, belief systems, and how absolutely evil people can be in those kind of situations, really gets under my skin. So it's effective for me in an almost negative way. But I force myself to look past that and my own feelings about that kind of thing to try to enjoy this. And so I will get into spoilers, but not right away. So this movie does start out as kind of like a typical, like, if you didn't see the trailer, okay? I'm going to try to talk to you like you haven't, if some of you haven't seen the trailer. Dan Stevens is this guy who kind of just seems like he comes out, he's not been around his family. He's kind of like everybody thought he was dead. And he's being sent by his family's attorney, it seems like, to find his sister that has been taken by this cult on this island. And you know, they have this ransom and they want proof of life. Don't pay it unless you see her, you know, alive and all this stuff. So you think you were going in for kind of like a Wicker Man situation where somebody's going to investigate a weird cult. So that's what it really reminds me of. Some of this is Wicker Man. It reminds me of a lot of things, but we'll get to that. And so you know, like, Dan Stevens appears to have like kind of a morphine addiction. And so he just kind of seems like this kind of scuzzy guy who's, for some reason, going to do this mission to find his sister. He seems kind of very, he seems really shady, but up to the challenge, because I mean, some of the things he does early on are stuff that, you know, a kind of an anti-hero situation would do. Like, he has to get on this boat, but he realizes that the thing that he has is marked. It's different than the others, and he knows that he has to switch tags that are like little, kind of like a passport with somebody else. And when he does that, he sees the effects of what happens after he switches that little passport type thing with another person. And, you know, you'd think a nice person would try to figure out another way. And, and I love that Dan Stevens' character has you thinking one way, and by the end of the movie, it's completely different. And that's a lot of the things that kind of about this movie. You get shown one thing, and then it's completely another. So, like, when you think this is just the story of this cult on this island, this kind of... They wouldn't call themselves a cult, I don't think. Or most cults probably don't. But you know what I mean? Like, you probably wouldn't just have to... You wouldn't, on the surface, categorize this as a cult. They do have some kind of bizarre religious belief about, you know, the sea or something. They allude to this thing about life when a sheep kind of falls into their boat from like another part of the boat, and Dan Stevens tries to save it, like to hold on to it, and this other guy just takes it and whips it off the back of the boat, saying we don't interfere. You know, she gives and takes, you know, whatever she wants, kind of like this kind of bizarre way of looking at life and death. But they do seem to be more like they were trying to make this community away from the tyranny of British rule. I shouldn't do it like that. British, you know, a lot of people have had terrible, you know, the British Crown hasn't been known to treat people very well in the past. Like, hey, we're Americans. We know about treating people poorly. So they get to this place, and it seems to be like they want to just have something separate from the British rule, and that they've got a weird way of doing things here. And over the course of the movie, it just starts to get more bizarre. And like the blood that everybody's supposed to leave in a jar outside their rooms. And when he pours somebody else's blood into a jar, he cuts himself, and that blood falls on the floor, and it moves to the crack in the floor where something is there to slurp it up. So right there, you know, oh, and there's also like some weird presence standing at the end of the hallway. So you know there's something kind of supernaturally going on here, and pretty gross. And so that's when you get to the heart of it, because you can't really talk about this movie much further without spoilers. There's like a subplot where this girl and her boyfriend, forbidden type lovers, are meeting up in secret, and she gets pregnant. They have this, like, you know, they're not supposed to be together kind of thing. It's like, how do people have kids if nobody ever bangs? You know, I don't know. This rigid way of looking at things. But there's always like a crazy reason for people to be upset. Like when the father, and before we get into like that, when the father of the girl that gets pregnant freaks out, there almost is a reasonable reason for him being upset. It's how far he takes it. After he gets upset, takes it down a real cuckoo highway. But like when there's a scene where they're trying to, a sheep's giving birth, and the birth comes out all fucking wrong. The lamb is like all ripped open. It's alive and dying, but it's ripped open. And so this father is like afraid that because she gave birth on the island, her baby's gonna be like a monster like the sheep's baby was. Kind of like, makes me think of Lost, where you can't give birth on this island, or the mothers die before they give birth. So like some sort of supernatural thing is causing the problems, like with the crops and things like that. But before we get into spoilers and things like that, I want to talk about one of the things that besides like it feeling like The Wicker Man, it makes me think of games like Fallout and Skyrim, and how when you're wandering around the wasteland, or, you know, through Skyrim's mountains, and you go and you find these little like villages, like burned out, corpses everywhere, skeletons everywhere. You find books and things. You find these little bits of stories where you can tell something was, you know, there was a city or a village that was once there and things went bad, you know, and you'll read things like that you can pick up in like audio logs and things like that in these games. They give you like this crazy storyline of like how one place could have like this utopia, and how people began to turn on each other, or there was this thing of power that made people like go nuts. And I feel like that's what we're kind of watching here in this, is the before somebody finds the remains of what used to be. This is like what happens in those stories that you don't get to see. The fall from grace of these places, where everybody kind of turns on each other and goes absolutely bananas over whether it's a religious belief or some sort of powerful thing that they find, this supernatural and all this. And then, you know, you kind of like years later, you know, as the lone wanderer or, you know, the dragonborn in Skyrim, you find this information, and it really feels like that. And it's one of the main things I could think of. I know that maybe that's a stretch for a lot of people. If you haven't played games like that, I don't expect you to understand what I'm talking about. But for those of you who do, maybe you'll appreciate that. So we're going to get into spoilers. So should you see this movie, if you like really good horror, and just kind of movies like The Wicker Man meets, geez, I don't even know. It's pretty good. It's pretty intense. It's very intense. It can be very gory at times. The acting is pretty top notch. It has one of the most evil villains I've seen in a long time. And it's not Michael Sheen. It's like his lieutenant is just one bad dude. And you can tell from jump that this guy is really, 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 really bad. I mean, just despicable. Like I wanted to just reach through the screen and fucking kill him. And yeah, like if you can handle all that insanity, because it is really insane. Gareth Evans did, you know, his is not his first foray into like stories like this. If you watched VHS Part 2, I think it might still be on Netflix. I don't know. It's like that anthology of indie directors doing like little horror spots. He did one of the best ones I've seen. It's definitely a highlight of that series, called Safe Harbor, about a film crew like investigating a cult. So this isn't like the first time that he's kind of dove into this kind of territory. It's the first time, but this takes place in like 1905. So it's just as far as timelines go, it's a little bit different than that, because this has to do with like, you know, like ancient Celtic type Scottish like spirits and things. So I do highly recommend it. It is 2 hours long, over 2 hours long, and depending on how you feel about endings, this has a pretty, it makes you wait a really long time, where it just feels really hopeless and helpless, and just like a lot of stories from this time. And a lot of times I don't care for that kind of thing, because when it comes to like horror stuff, I'm always rooting for the good guys. I don't like the down endings that horror movies can have. But anyway. So now we're going to get into spoilers. So what we find out what is really going on here is that these two guys, Michael Sheen's character and his top man, they found this island. They went to this island, and they find out that on the island there's like a spirit of the island that they capture and use to help them build their community. So they started this place to be away from the British rule. Short term, yeah, but I mean long term, it really couldn't sustain itself no matter what. I think they thought that when they found this thing, that somehow it'd protect them, but it really doesn't have that kind of ability. I mean, yeah, you find out later that it's killed dudes. It's got dudes like up in trees that it like killed, but long term, this is just an ancient thing that would probably fall to the modern world. They're just kind of keeping it alive, and you also find out that this thing really just wants to die, that they've been using it in the wrong way. They've tainted what this creature is meant to do, and its purpose. And they use it for their own gains, which is why I believe, it's starting to ruin their crops. It's rebelling against them. It's not working right. Like the one guy calls it a machine. And he's just fucking gone. He's the same one who has the daughter that got pregnant. And, he sees what the land is doing to them. He takes it as like a slight, like this thing owes him, and when it's not working right, it's not their fault. And so, like when he decides that he needs to cut the baby out of his daughter because he knows that what's inside her is probably as tainted as the rest of the place, he ends up killing her, which, like, why if this was going to end in her death, he should have just, like, not to say that he should kill her at all, because it's a terrible, terrible, evil thing. But I mean, he should have just cut her throat if the whole end result was going to be her death anyway. And then he turns and blames the kid that got her pregnant. So he knows he murdered his daughter, or Mercy killed. And then when the kid decides that that's not cool and tries to attack him, he puts the blame on the kid so that he can walk around the town and be Mr. Hoity-toity, highfalutin fucker, and take control of the place. And this is just where everything just goes downhill from there. The torture device that they have in this movie, where they put the kid in that thing, what kind of utopian society comes up with a device like that? Like, you had that ready? Like, what kind of peaceful village is this supposed to be when they have got that ready for anybody who does things the wrong way? This place was doomed from the beginning. If you're like, when people do something really bad, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to hang them? Are we going to, put them in front of a firing squad? Are we going to cut their throats? No, let's tie them down and put them in their arms and legs and head in a vice, and then have a old frickin' timey turn crank drill go into the back of their head and through their brain and rip their whole head off. My goodness. To talk more about the performances, Michael Sheen again and Dan Stevens are really good in this as Dan Stevens. When you find out that he's not just this, like, he's not a, some kind of junkie drifter. It turns out that kind of like the movie Silence, he was like a missionary where he went to Peking, China to bring Catholicism or Christianity to the Chinese. And just like in Silence, Martin Scorsese's movie, it doesn't work out. And they end up like torturing him and branding him with a great big cross, which probably explains why he's addicted to morphine, because the pain of what he's been going through has really messed with him. And so you find out that he's just been like a really tortured individual, and that he's not a bad person. He's looking shady because he has to do shady things to try to find his sister. And so it's nice to see that this character was not what you expected of him. And he does become kind of this reluctant hero. And in the end, he really is just trying to find his sister and get the hell out of there. Michael Sheen, on the other hand, is this guy that I believe he had good intentions. Why he teamed himself with this evil fuckhead in the first place is beyond me. Maybe he needed muscle at the beginning of this little civilization they were making. But when they find the spirit, creature, whatever you want to call it, it's tainted right away. This guy just tries to figure out how to use it to their own advantage to keep things going, because without them being a part of the rule of Britain and not having anybody to trade with, they need to have crops and things. And so they figured this was their self-sustaining system. This creature, this machine that they've turned into a machine for them, was going to be their way to never need anybody. But once it starts failing, that's when they kidnap Dan Stevens' sister. And, they're trying to blackmail them for money so that they can sustain this little society. But you can tell at this point that it's already gone way down. It's going down. And Michael Sheen trying to stay who he is in the face of just, it's all coming down around him. And by the end of this movie, you know, he's lost everything too, to this other person that takes over. That it's all been twisted, and because he didn't, you know, maybe make a stand earlier, he's lost everything, including his daughter, who's now doesn't want anything to do with him, and the whole civilization's now falling down around them. And so by the end of this movie, you know, Dan Stevens' character has to, he gets, you know, he ends up killing the creature. It wants to die. It asks him to. It's been waiting for him. That's why it trusted him and didn't hurt him before. And so he burns it alive, and then he eventually kills the evil crazy dude, but in the process, in turn, he is fatally wounded too. And by the end of the movie, everybody that's, you know, gets away, you know, everybody that has survived the fires and everything, which is most everybody really. The body count really isn't that big in this movie. They get away, and Michael Sheen and Dan Stevens are left on the island. And Dan Stevens is dying, but then his blood starts to grow things around him. And I saw like somebody had a video saying the ending of this movie explained. And I guess if you're really not following, he's basically taking the place of the spirit that was there. That this place, that he took the place of the thing that was there before, which means it's probably been passed down through generations of people, that this island has like a guardian that it needs. And so even though he's kind of dying, he's also kind of becoming something even bigger than himself. And Michael Sheen is still there, and you got to think that hopefully, there's like only a couple ways you can think of this, is that either he's going to try to do better, or he's going to leave well enough alone, and maybe just live out his days on this island. But it's a really, really interesting movie. Like I said, it's very hardcore at times. I can't believe that the same guy, Gareth Evans, who did The Raid and The Raid 2, is the same guy that did this, because these are vastly different movies. There's a couple of times when there's a couple of action shots in this that do remind me of The Raid, but like it's nice to see that he has like range as a director. And again, Dan Stevens, I love him, and Michael Sheen, really, really great. And so that's about all I have to say about this. I know I kind of all over the place, but that's mostly how I do things. But yeah, so yeah, recommend this. I highly recommend this to the people that can handle watching this kind of movie. Otherwise, you might want to steer clear of this, far clear, because like I said, it has some pretty insane, gross moments. So anyway, if you like this review, please hit the like button, comment, share, subscribe, all that rigmarole. Otherwise, this is Robert Smirking Gun Reviews saying if you're new to the channel, check out all my other stuff. I got plenty on here to watch. And otherwise, we will see you in the next video.